Welcome everyone to the last session in the virtual Capstone Design Conference. My name is Keith Stanfill, and I'm the Edwards Assistant Dean and Director of Integrated Engineering Design at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. This session today is on teamwork and difficult conversations. And let's see, Bridget, I'm not sure where I'm hearing all the dinging bells from, but I'm wondering if that's coming from me.
That's from people
I was
joining.
muted, so.
Yeah, it's strange. Okay, well.
Keith, are the participants able to hear the dinging too, or is it just the host?
I'm certainly hearing it, but that's okay.
I didn't hear it as a participant.
That's because you're the host and people are joining.
Okay, very good. So, Capstone is definitely a welcome to the real world experience. And for some of our students, it's really their first time in a really technically intense environment in that fashion. And, we've all experienced team killing actors. There's the jerk, the slacker, the depressive pessimist. And they're challenging to deal with in a face-to-face environment. And it's even going to be more challenging in this virtual project world. So I thought before we introduce our panelists, first I'll give you a little bit of history about this session on difficult conversations. In 2014, we had a session at the Capstone Design Conference that I organized along with Sherry Robinson, who at that time was the associate director for the UF Counseling Center. So she was a licensed mental health professional, and she and I, and actually our associate dean for student affairs, got together and sort of organized a workshop on this topic. And I think we titled the thing, "I Didn't Sign Up for This." Because for many of us in capstone design, wow, this is just a whole new soup of experiences. Susanna Howe mentioned that this morning, that this course is so different than other lecture-based courses that students are introduced to. As part of that workshop, though, we introduced a rubric for sort of escalating intervention, when you needed to involve the university police department, when you should direct someone to the student counseling center or the dean of students office. And we broke into groups and analyzed some case studies. There was a lot of sharing. It was very emotional. In fact, one of the attendees shared a suicide prevention scenario. It was very emotional. Really is a great workshop, I thought. In 2016 and 2018, we continued the conversation with panel sessions at the conference and invited more folks to get involved. And we thought this topic is so crucial that we should include it also in this session. So, as we've titled this session and described it, it's, one of the challenges of teaching design is the difficult conversations that sometimes need to happen between the instructor and students or within the teams. And teaching online adds another layer of distance between individuals. And so we want to know about, what are the practices that we can adapt to this new normal to help identify situations and intervene effectively. So what you're going to see in this discussion today is prevention and intervention. There are different approaches and tools. So I really want to thank those of you that were able to submit some ideas and questions that you had ahead of time. And we'll try to get to all of those if we can. We're joined by three panelists today: Dr. Daria Kotys-Schwartz from University of Colorado Boulder. We've got Dr. Olga Pierrakos from Wake Forest University, and Dr. Izetta Slade from University of Tennessee in Knoxville. So Daria and Olga are both on the faculty side of things, and Izetta comes at this from a human resources perspective. So she's got experience in private industry as well as with the university side. And then behind the scenes, there are a bunch of, if you're looking at the duck on the surface of the water, everything looks really calm, but underneath those feet are really going like mad. Well, we've got Bridget Smizer, who is organizing our session here, and she's our host and letting folks in. Beth DeBartolo is our scribe. And then we've got Alexis Gilmore and Libby Fortunato, who are monitoring the chat and organizing questions. And we're actually sort of real time doing this in Mural as well as on Google Docs. So we're going to start off. The panelists are each going to have a 5-minute pitch, and they're going to address the following. Quick background about their experience with capstone design or with industry and HR perspectives. And then their approach, principles that they use in supporting teamwork and having those difficult conversations, and then strategies that have been effective. So I'm going to pose some questions and share some of those from our contributors, and then we'll also be monitoring the chat and so forth to get your questions. And hopefully, time permitting, we'll open up to some more stuff from the audience. And so hope everybody good to go with that? Some thumbs up here. Awesome. So with that, let me, Daria, would you like to start us off?
I'd be happy to, Keith. So first, Keith, thank you for the invitation today. For those of you who I have not met, my name is Daria Kotys-Schwartz. I'm from the University of Colorado Boulder. To start with, Keith's first question is a little bit about our background. I've been involved with capstone design as a program since 2004. Started out as a faculty advisor during that time, really with our competition teams, and moved on to take over our capstone design program in 2011. So right now, as a faculty member, I really serve as the course coordinator. So I've sat both in the faculty advisor role and then sat in also this more administrative role that we have, and also operate the center that oversees this for both our undergrads and grads called Design Center Colorado. I also run our hands-on innovation facility called IdeaForge. So I actually wear multiple different hats, all that helps with the capstone design process. So to give a little bit of background on our approach, we take a holistic approach to when it comes to teamwork and conflict resolution. So I'll focus it on that conflict resolution side. I'm careful because teamwork is such a loaded word also, and what that means to each of us. But one of the big things is for us, we really focus on training as well as coaching when it comes to our students, the course coordinators. So I do actually co-teach the class with one other person because we are a large mechanical engineering class of approximately 250 students. We are industry oriented, so we run our class with typically 30 to 33 externally sponsored teams. So because we have those sponsored teams, each of our groups also has a faculty advisor as well as a industry client that they meet with weekly. So a big part of the process we use is actually training not just our students, but also quite a bit on that prevention side that Keith was speaking to, relative to also training both our faculty advisors as well as our clients. The way we look at this is to be able to go ahead and deal with conflict resolution and really coaching students through this. We need to have multiple people who are helping with this process. So to give a little bit of an overview, when I say we use a holistic approach, we do team activity approaches on the front end to try to first make sure that we're doing expectation setting. So what this ends up looking like from the student's perspective is from the time they first form teams, we use team roles to make sure that everyone understands what their role will be on the team. And part of that is a team role proposal that becomes explicit dialogue that they have with their faculty advisors. Now we call our faculty advisors directors, so I'll try to use the word faculty advisor as I'm speaking today, because I know most of you use that word to distinguish who's with your teams on a weekly basis. Part of the other big expectation setting we have for our students are team charters. So setting from the very beginning, what is the expectation, and as well of how they are all, and this is about 5 weeks in, but how are they going to set the norms of their team from the very beginning? And the reason is that most of our teams think that they know how to function as a team, but we say many times they know how to function as a group. Many of them come from previous classes that if they have a team member who is not participating, or if they have conflict with, they just ignore them and get the project done without them. So what we're really trying to have them understand is that teamwork does look different than just working as a group together. The one thing that we also acknowledge is many of them don't come with the tool sets though, that as things get difficult, how to start having conversations with one another. So we use a few different frameworks. We do what is called bystander training that we do in collaboration with our Office of Institutional and Equity Compliance. That is one of our trainings we do. We do empathy development through social styles training, but we also do training specifically around difficult conversations for our students also. So it sounds like a lot of training up front, a lot of this groundwork we're setting, and all that groundwork is being set up for us on the front end so that as they start storming through team formation, and we talk to our students about those stages of team formation, as they start to storm, what we're really looking for them to be ready to do is come to us and start having these conversations of how do I approach team members. And at that point, it becomes more of advising approaches. We really try to work with them through one-on-one coaching, how to have those conversations. We do eventually step in if they are having difficulties through this, but part of that, that coaching is a crucial conversations framework that we're using. And we're also doing team check-in meetings just to get a pulse on our teams along the way, because as many of you know, we don't sometimes find out that there's problems till the end of this process. And then I'm going to follow all this up, which is that faculty, mentor, and client involvement. All of the training that we're doing with our students, we're also doing with our clients, and we're doing with our faculty members. Many of them are not comfortable having some of these coachings with our students. So what we've done is also train them to say, whoa, I'm not comfortable with this. And they know to send them to us as the course coordinators to start having that conversation. And that's when we also work with the contextualization, which is making sure we understand all sides of the problem. And we call it our Venn diagram of truth. What we really try to get at is what is really happening here and how to help coach our teams through this, and also use their peer feedback in this process too. Sorry, Keith, it's a lot. When I said holistic,
cool.
There's a lot going on that we're working on for trying to attack this. So I'm gonna pass it because I think is Olga our next one?
Yes, yes.
Olga, I'm gonna pass this to you.
Well, you laid a great foundation. Thanks, Daria. Thanks, Keith. Really excited to join everyone. We do not claim to be experts here, so I'm excited to learn from you and from the questions you have. So that's one thing we learn in being design educators is that we're constantly learning. And I've learned so much already today with really cool interventions and strategies and best practices that everyone has been using. So really, really happy to be part of this. A little bit about my background. So I've been teaching design projects the last 18 years. They're not only capstone design projects. So many of us have curricula where design work and design projects really start in the first year. And that certainly has been my experience in infusing design projects across a curriculum. And so what's unique about me is that I've been a founding faculty member of 2 brand new engineering programs. The first time at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And currently I'm founding chair at Wake Forest University, the new Department of Engineering at Wake Forest. We've just completed year 3 and we're about to launch our capstone design experience, which runs senior year, but does start with a 1-credit experience in the spring semester of junior year to begin to lay the foundation for capstone. So that's a little bit about my background. I guess the other thing that's really unique that kind of feeds into the next prompt, the principles that we're all using to kind of to think about teamwork, but also to have those difficult conversations. We are, as a department, grounded in offering and delivering a liberal arts education. We're actually working with philosophers, psychologists, anthropologists, as we do this work and build this unique curriculum. We currently have a grant from the Kern Family Foundation to infuse character and character development across the curriculum. And so talking about these important virtues of courage and the courage that it takes to stand up, thinking about the resilience that it takes to be able to resolve conflict and to be able to kind of work through the challenges of being in a team and the challenge of working with complex problems, to looking at teamwork as a virtue, to looking at authenticity and the importance of bringing our whole self to a problem. And so those are just kind of ways in which we're building a culture as a department, but also ways that we're translating that into the curriculum. I guess in doing capstone, I also have learned to distinguish that you can have a successful project without a successful team. And the other way around too, you can also have a successful team without the project being successful. And our ultimate goal is to have both of those be successes. And so it's a recognition that we're not just after a product, but it's also the process and the learning that's embedded in all that becomes really important. I agree with Daria that laying out really clear expectations up front is very important. It's not a matter of if conflict happens, it's a matter of when it happens. And so framing the conversation around that and preparing students for when it happens, what do you do, is really fundamental. We invite students in the first day of class to think about what are your expectations as you work with others? Kind of imagine the workplace. Imagine this is a real world internship. How do you expect supervisors to treat you? How do you expect to treat your peers? How do you expect to treat technicians as you work with them in becoming an engineer? And so their responses to those questions, we throw back at them and say, these become the norms for what we expect of you. So we allow their voice to come through and to set those clear expectations. And they're truly honest, and those responses come with integrity. And so it allows us to use their voice to begin setting those expectations. We're also using, at Wake Forest, we'll be using Scrum as a framework to truly deliver an agile approach to design thinking, an agile approach to managing a team and a project. And so there's certain values that are embedded with this idea of agile management, and that's visibility of work, trust, accountability, respect, openness, courage. So again, those are all values that we expect of them in how they manage each other and how they manage a project and the team. So there's constantly a focus in a conversation around project success, but also team success. And then just to mention a couple of strategies that I have found to be really effective. With each member of the team, one-on-one performance meetings become really important. So like I found immense success in connecting with every single member of the team by having those one-on-one sessions a couple of times a semester. Not only when conflict happens, but just as the norm. We observe things as educators that is important for them to hear. And it may be totally good, or it may be an opportunity for us to boost their confidence as developing engineers. And so one-on-one meetings, I think, is really important. Debriefs from design review. So debrief meetings on things to show and model for them the importance of having that reflection, to model the process of reflection. Let's see. Other thing that is important in building accountability is having those kind of clarity points. And again, similar to expectations, regular progress reports, regular and very clear inspectable products that students are each kind of working on. And so those are things that are being upfront and offering some structure, I do believe helps. So that's my spiel. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you, Olga. That's awesome. So Isetta, please share with us.
Okay, again, I'm Isetta Slade, and I'm with the University of Tennessee in Knoxville as Executive Director of Human Resources. And my background is primarily human resources. If you look at degrees that I have, you wonder if I'm a little, if I really know what it is I want to do in life. Undergrad degree in finance, a master's in human resource development, and a doctorate in learning and leadership. And trust me, they're all connected. I learned early on that I enjoyed problem solving and had a failed attempt at majoring in math because I found out too late that in order to major in math, you have to also take a lot of science. And as deep as my love is for math, the hatred for science is just as deep. So, but anyway, so I ended up being a finance major and graduating with a degree in finance. So, but I also learned that that problem solving really stemmed to problem solving with people and helping people to get to problem solving and going from what they could do to problem solve within themselves, within groups and teams, families, etc. And the majority of my work life has been with higher ed institutions. I had a 5-year hiatus from the University of Tennessee, where I worked in Louisville, Kentucky, with a private industry. It was a physical therapy management oversight, and they asked me to come in to put in their HR infrastructure. And one of the things that really attracted me to that is because they were looking for leadership development for their physical therapists. And I'm like, that's a novel idea. Here you have an industry physical therapist and they want leadership development. So we certainly work with them in starting one from their customer service development and their common beliefs of what customer service was, and then an emerging leaders program, and then an advanced leadership program. And my approach, because I am a student of leadership, is that is really a foundation of leadership development, and having people understand that leadership is not a title. It is what's within each one of us, and it's developing that leadership within each one of us and helping students coming into the workforce to understand that one of the major things that employers are looking for, this word of engagement, the ability to engage and the ability to engage others. And that's where that leadership development part comes in. And I'm going to walk that backwards from the approach that we take of engagement. In order to have engagement, you have to have some relationship. And in order to have some relationship, you definitely have to have communication. So those are the things that, as far as the leadership development that we focus on, of those key element developments of communication, relationship building, and engagement. And I really laughed when I saw the topic of difficult conversations, because in today's age of computer-mediated conversations and communication, all conversations are becoming difficult because we are losing that skill or the ability to just have a conversation with each other. And a conversation is not an email exchange. A conversation is not a text exchange. So that's the part of getting back to some of the basics of teaching how do we even communicate with each other? What are the basics of communication? How am I assertive in sharing and getting across my own ideas? How am I responsive in understanding and listening to that other person's ideas and opinions? So those are some of the things that we work with. As far as team, and like Daria, I try to stay away from that team building. I think I prefer supportive work environments or supportive work groups, something of that nature, because team building is one of those overused terms, and that people typically will roll their eyes if you say we're going to do some team building activities or team building training. And helping people understand that there is a difference between a group and a team. And really parroting some things that both Olga and Daria have mentioned of having some groundwork, whether it's an intact team or an ad hoc team, of having that team establish ground rules or principles or for themselves. And certainly if you're having them do it, you may have in a particular department various teams, and you can have some overarching values, but having each individual team establish among themselves, okay, these are the ground rules, these are the things that we stand by. Also parroting, having team members with different roles and having those roles outlined as to what those roles are. You may have someone who is the person who does the progress mapping. You may have someone who is the coordinator of conflict. Some of those things that you certainly need someone who's going to be the lead for the team. We typically at times will say, if it's a long running team, to rotate those roles and have different teams, have different members of the team having those roles. In the way of conflict, and conflict, of course, is one of the inevitables that will come up. And one of my jobs early on at UT was that I was the conflict resolution coordinator. And that's not that I coordinated conflict across the university, but I worked in mediating, helping to mediate disputes, et cetera. And in my study of conflict, it has evolved from realizing that all conflict is not bad as our perspective. Conflict really points out that there is an issue that needs to be addressed or resolved. And I have yet to find a conflict that did not originate in a breakdown in communication. I have just not been able to find that. So that goes back to that communication piece. But now of having the teams understand conflict is not a bad thing. Moving from all conflict cannot be resolved, but you can manage all conflict. So having the working through, what does that mean? How will we manage the conflict? But the ultimate goal is conflict transformation, of knowing what is it we have learned from this conflict. And for those teams looking to get into the workforce, that is so critical as they're working with these teams that they can put on a resume. I work with this group and these are some of the skills I gained through the conflict transformation, building communication skills. Those are the important things that they may not realize how crucial it is, and employers will look at that. As far as the conflict issues, we push that down to the lowest level possible to start there to manage or resolve it. That means starting with empowering the team themselves to start there, of trying to resolve it and having them have some things in place as to how they resolve it. And I have done a lot of talking, and I will, I think I've answered everything that was put out there to us.
So that was beautiful, thank you. So I think maybe let's see if we can address some of the comments from the folks that submitted prior to the start of the session today. And one of the questions, I guess, are an intervention. Maybe we'll start at something that I think is super common across all of our programs, and it's dealing with just an individual student that is not pulling their weight on a team, and can't get them motivated. So I'm just wondering what kind of interventions that you would recommend, and strategies for dealing with that. And I guess let me start with Daria on this one.
I think one of the things that I saw as a question, I think Jennifer Turns had put it up in the last session, which was sometimes we'll use these words, the person who's not pulling their weight. And the one thing that I will go back again to this idea of communication being the number one underpinning factor in every team conflict, including when I have found team members saying someone is not pulling their weight. One, I encourage all of us to make sure that we stop and take a moment to understand. Again, this gets back to the ideas of context. What is really happening on this team? Is it true that someone's not pulling their weight? Is there an underlying reason? Is it that someone has mental health issues? Is it someone who maybe has something going on at home? Sometimes I think we can jump to conclusions to why the work is not being done without understanding that in some cases, the team isn't using meeting minutes appropriately to understand what their action items are. And those are some of the, when I think of my strategies, there's the prevention side of these strategies, the norming of your team, understanding what my role is, both administratively and technically. But also then it gets back to this idea of communication. Did I understand what I was supposed to be doing? There are many times that I will bring in my students who maybe are considered the slacker on the team who's not doing the work, only to find out that there's a much larger underpinning problem going on there. And I would say that from a strategy perspective, one is understanding what is the root cause of why that student is not doing the work. I've actually found rarely is it because that student themselves is what we would give a horrible, a tag of lazy or doesn't want to contribute. Many times I've found that it might even be they are afraid to contribute because they don't feel as knowledgeable as the other students because they haven't had an internship. Or sometimes they have something horrific going on at home. And I think we're going to see more of this upcoming year in this COVID environment that we're in until we build trust with our students, which I know is another conversation that was coming up. Our students, we've been talking about this in many ways that they're not comfortable coming forward yet to say that they have a parent or a relative who they're caring for in this environment that we're living in right now, or that they have concerns, deep concerns at the same time. So, so I think the big one is, my advice is understand what the underpinning cause is first. And then if you do find you have someone on your team who just chooses not to do the work, then the next big question becomes, what can you put in place as an expectation? We put performance correction plans in place that are detailed out. They are written out with that student, so they have a very clear understanding. And Olga, this goes back to what you said, so that when we have these performance meetings with them, so they understand their performance, we have very clear, explicit expectations of where they're at and where we want them to be. So
that kind of helps to keep them from getting voted off the island.
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so Isetta, is there anything you'd like to add to Daria's comment on handling the perceived slacker? Because I'm sure this happens in the workplace all the time.
Yes, and as Daria mentioned, the communication part, finding out first what's going on and not going on assumptions. Sometimes it could be, depending on the individual, it could be something cultural, something family-wise, that there could be some insecurities there, education-wise. There could be some communication style differences, just a number of things of finding out. Another thing you may want to consider with those groups is finding a way to have some relationship building first on the front end before they're just thrown into being a team, because you have really just put them together as a group. And if they've not gotten to know a little bit about each other, I don't know if that's pairing them up or having an accountability partner within the team or getting to know each other, but something along those lines of getting them to back up a little bit and just maybe do some relationship building first. Yeah. And then that frees up a little bit more for the conversations going forward.
Very good. And Olga, what's been your experience?
I agree with Daria and everyone on the panel. One thing I would add is when truly somebody, and it's not clear, if that root kind of cause hasn't been discovered, instead of the faculty advisor or the faculty coach stepping in, one strategy that I've used that has been effective is to actually invite a member of the student team to actually take on that role and have that initial conversation so that it does not kind of create the dynamic. So one, you empower the student team to look into it and to discover what is happening before a faculty kind of steps in, where automatically the student may feel like their grade is going to be impacted or penalized in some way. So I try to kind of support and empower the team to take action because we're all observing kind of what may be happening. And so how do you create that? I think that's something that has helped. Another piece that is in line with this idea of using agile management or Scrum is the visibility of work. So often we work on teams and you develop action items and you may see something that somebody is working on 2 weeks later. And so with the idea of agile, and if you're effectively using it, is that work has to be visible at all times. So it becomes really clear and it builds accountability of who's working on what. And so there's strategies kind of within agile that help in that regard. If truly there are not other underlying issues that are kind of holding back the performance of that individual or those individuals.
And I guess I would turn this to Izetta. How do you coach managers to help tease out these kind of issues? Because I would imagine in your world, when stuff gets escalated to your level, things have begun to spiral out of control.
And it's going back to something I call courage leadership. It's not being afraid to address issues. And that typically is what happens with managers who have allowed things to spiral out of control. They either do not have the courage to address it or do not have the skill. So it is really, when you say coaching, actually having an education approach to it, of sitting down and actually doing some examples and walking through some scenarios and some what ifs, actually getting them to, rather than my telling them, getting input from them as to, okay, you have this situation. What do you think will happen if you do not address it? What will be the consequences? How will that impact you? How will that impact the other team members? And those are the kinds of things. What will happen with your productivity? You have this goal at the end result. What's going to happen if this behavior goes unchecked or unaddressed? So really coaching them by asking questions and getting them to that point of understanding that I can do this without my telling them how to do it.
Cool. I really love that. You know, it's interesting. Daria, one of your former colleagues there at University of Colorado Boulder, Gary Paulus, said that one of the assignments he would give the capstone teams very early on was to submit a picture with the entire team sharing a meal together. Now, this could be eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or sharing some cookies or something like that. And he said invariably, the teams that struggled to deliver that picture were the ones that he had difficulty with. It was, the relationship building aspect. So I think that's really cool. There was
that tradition has continued, by the way. The only difference is we stopped having them take the photo while having a meal because we started giving it to our clients. And we realized that in a dirty bar with a beer in front of them, it wasn't as professional as we were looking for. However, I totally agree with Izetta about the idea that having some of that personal time together. So in some cases, we've had some of our teams create bowling groups together I mean, you
Okay.
name it. I mean, absolutely, any chances they can to have that time that's social and get to know each other outside of the team. But also, we didn't just start doing that with our teams. We then expanded that to our faculty advisors.
Great.
We actually started a meet and greet that was never meant to be technical. We realized every time clients and faculty advisors were meeting their teams, it was immediately in a meeting and all business. And one of the best things we ever did is we started a meet and greet that was specifically to get to know their faculty advisor in a more informal setting, to learn about each other for about 45 minutes first before having that first meeting together. So their first meeting was not as awkward, but also they had a sense that they were all people working together.
Fantastic. Fantastic. You know, and there's another element that kind of goes along with this, you know, getting to the root cause of team member not performing and so forth. And one of the ways that we addressed that when I was at the University of Florida is that there is a training program that they have there. It's an avatar-based training by a company called Cognito, and that's with a K. I'll put the link in the chat. But they have an at-risk peer training that students could take, and we had that as part of our onboarding for the course, so that they knew sort of what to do. I suppose maybe not like bystander training, but a similar idea. And there was a parallel course for faculty where they could get this kind of certification in what to do with a student, an at-risk student, and how to have that first conversation and get them directed to the right resources if necessary. So that was very rich. I guess one of the questions I will have for you all is, so let's take that scenario now that we just discussed, you know, student not performing well. What do we do now when we're conducting all of our contact with students virtually? And I'll throw that one at Olga first.
I mean, I think for us, the one-on-one discussions will continue. And so we typically also have multiple advisors or instructors that are supporting. And so so usually one of them will kind of set up that one-on-one meeting to have with the student and kind of get to that root cause. And I mean, even this past semester, I've had some difficult conversations with students, or they perceived it as difficult. And I think it's important on our end to kind of frame it in a very positive way and say that this really becomes an opportunity. And so where's the opportunity in this? And to turn it into action. So as Zeta talked about this some too, is where can we take, what are those questions to ask that we can kind of empower them to take action, but through questioning for them to discover what the action is. So that's something that I have seen to kind of work well, is kind of preparing for that meeting, knowing that it's going to be a difficult conversation. I know it's always hard because you don't know how the other person will react. Some people get defensive. Some people will really kind of embrace the opportunity to talk about it. And so I think preparation on our end in framing and asking those questions helps. Not being judgmental in any way. So asking the question in a way that doesn't suggest any particular judgment being placed on them, but as an exploration and a questioning that allows them to discover what could be the next steps that will support you. What are some of the next steps that would also support your team? What is it that I can do to support you? So I think those kind of questions do help. And so that's kind of where I would start.
So, you know, I guess in the university environment, you know, students are, you know, if a faculty member asks to speak with a student that they have some responsibility for, you know, there's a I guess, a duty. The student has a duty, an obligation to respond, but they don't always do that. I suppose in the work environment as well, same way. A manager wants to speak with an employee, they have a duty to respond. So what do we do in these situations where we've got a person whose performance is starting to drop off, and we can't solve that communication problem? We can't get them to respond to us. I mean, it's difficult enough to hunt a student down and wait for them after class or something like that and have that discussion. How do we do this now in this this world of Zoom? And I guess, Izetta, I'll throw it at you now that we've got so many faculty and staff who are now working all remotely, and we've got to make sure that our folks, our staff members, are fully engaged and continuing to be productive.
Yeah. And Keith, my hope had been that I'd see a drop off in disciplinary action, and it's been just the opposite. And it's really been rooted in, of course, this is a new norm, and you have a number of people, and if you hear that in the background, we have a lot of thunder happening here in Knoxville. But the expectations, and it started from really the expectations not being clear of what the expectations were, and having that not just verbally, but in writing. So we had drafted a telecommuting agreement. So some sort of an agreement that people can not just rely on memory for, that these are the expectations, to visit it periodically, to check in, to see how, especially this is something new for quite a few of our employees, and checking in to see how they're doing, because an offshoot of that is we're having a lot of emotional issues as well right now. So and I think they're going hand in hand as we go back to figuring out, well, why is this person a problem? It could be that they are having some emotional issues. But it can't stress the communication enough to not ignore it, because it's not going to just go away, suddenly fix itself. And operating out of care and not from a punitive standpoint. And that's regardless of whether you are handling it yourself or empowering students within the team to do so, but coaching them that it's operating from a position of care. And we all know that there will be times that you will have the hardcore ones that no matter how much care you're providing or how much guidance, they won't get it. And just having that courage to say, okay, these are the consequences I've outlined in this, and you've either, you have made the decision here as to what's going to happen. You're not passing this particular part of the course or the directives here, or you failed on this goal. And for us, it's an escalating thing of going to we give them opportunities to pull it together, but making sure that we are doing the follow-up, as we say, that it's tiring to have to, but you have truly failed that student and the process, or that employee and the process, if you're not following up and following through. If you have said there will be consequences, then there need to be those consequences if they've not lived up to their end of the bargain, because others are watching.
Right.
For them, others are watching, regardless if they're in the workplace or in the classroom, others are watching.
Right, that makes sense. So Daria, one of the techniques that you mentioned is developing that team charter and so forth. How do you see modifying now the team charter with this kind of telecommuting agreement type of approach, or is that something that you already started planning for the fall?
We are planning for it. On the other hand, I should also make sure that I preface, when we do a team charter, like we said, we do it about 5 weeks in, so that we start to establish norms on a team, expectations for their performance, for their behavior, but also how they want to handle things when it goes south. And it's very much team oriented. But I should also put out there's a disclaimer that there's a lot of coaching that goes on in that process also, because our team charters will revolve around people's camping trips and skiing, and suddenly we have to recenter them of what we're looking for. One of the things a lot of us know is our students don't like to have documentation that they feel is busy work. So part of this is modeling for them what a team charter would look like for us, what our norms look like between our team, how we've established these, even though, you know, we write them down, even though really they weren't written down in the beginning. They will be set up, Keith, absolutely, because of the way that we have framed them in the past for the Zoom environment, the telecommuting environment at the exact same time. But we don't have the students just go out and do this without feedback. And this gets back to what Olga was saying on the feedback and the reflection side. These team charters are reviewed then and they get feedback from their faculty advisors. We go through them and give feedback also to make sure that it is a professional, well thought out document. And then we revisit in January. And in January, we say, you've been together, you wrote this at week 5 when you thought you knew how you functioned. Do you actually function this way? Is this really your team norm? Are there elephants in the room that we haven't called out? If you could change things that you did in the fall, what would that look like? And how do we incorporate it in these documents to help guide what we look at for our fall, which is the execution phase of their projects, when the communication becomes even more essential.
Right.
And so,
I mean, I've had experience where we've asked the team, when we've had to do a team intervention, bring your charter with you.
yes.
And then, okay, did you follow this process? You know, and we're sitting here today and I'm wondering why. Did you follow the process that you have? Yeah.
We pulled those team charters out. When we have to intervene, we always start with coaching, trying to have them handle it themselves first.
Yeah.
And when it escalates, they try to go through the process on their own, and they reach a point where they have just gotten to a standstill. We start with those charters, Keith. Not even a question. The other one is, I think that a lot of us are going to ask this question, though, how are we going to do it in this environment? And I think this summer, if anything, I've started to learn that the things I was doing before in person can still be done in this environment. Even though it is in a Zoom context, it's in a Teams context, we still have the ability in these positions and roles, and those of you who are out that are supervisors for staff at your university or other faculty, it's the same thing. We can still have these really meaningful conversations in this context. We might have to have more touch points along the way. And I think that this is also one of the big elephants in the room that many of us are trying to figure out, is how to develop trust with our students when we can't see them, when we don't have the face-to-face contact to be able to read each other's faces, to be able to respond when they drop by our offices with a problem. How do we overcome the having to get online to come find us? Or as I always said, I'd walk past and say, how are you doing? And then their face would fall. And I don't have the chance to do that anymore. And I think that is something that is plaguing a lot of us here, which is going to be the, how do we start to develop trust with our students when we don't see them face to face? And so, sorry, I opened that can, Keith.
That's a good can, you know. In fact, I was just looking at this, you know, Sid from UPenn just saying, you know, my fear is the guilt of not being able to deliver all the mentoring that I do in person and access to facilities in school. That's going to be really difficult for
Was
this.
that Sid? Did you say it was Sid who said that?
Yeah.
Sid, I absolutely plan on telling my students that.
Yeah.
I will upfront tell them from day one that I am worried that I cannot deliver the way I've done things in the past. And I will be dangerously honest with them that we're going to try things that may not work. And it's going to be, it may look different, but we're going to find a way together. And that is our job as these capstone instructors. But I'm absolutely planning on sharing with them that fear that I have. Because if I want to model for them, if I want them to admit their fears to each other and what causes this conflict, then I've got to model for them that I'm willing to also be vulnerable in front of them. And this is not going to be ideal this year.
Yeah, it's going to be really tough. Going to be very tough. You know, I think Chris mentioned this in the Nifty Ideas session about this idea, and I refer to it as plan continuation bias, which has resulted in many shipwrecks and in airplane crashes and things like that, that we really do have to be flexible and willing to pivot. And I think, you know, Olga, that speaks to that, taking those agile project management approaches. So.
Yeah, I also saw a comment, I think it was Jennifer Terms, where to kind of make that accessibility a little bit easier, maybe you use tools like Slack. So it's easy for a student to kind of to feel like they're texting you and have a different way of accessing you during kind of this right, when those hallway conversations or end of class conversation can informally happen. How do we create other informal communication channels for them to feel safer or more accessible? So that was a good idea.
Yeah, very, very cool. Very cool. I guess, let me see if I can get to a couple of other questions here that were on the, on our notes here. So I think we've talked about some different ways to kind of head off problems by empowering our students with, you know, modeling behaviors for them, having them work through these ideas of, you know, how they're going to make decisions and hold each other accountable, and how they want to be treated and how they plan to treat others. I love the ideas of the reflections. And I think that is the challenge of trying to make this seem like it is part of the project, right? The kickback is always thinking that this is busy work type stuff, but it is really, really crucial. I guess let me go into, there was one of the questions that someone had, and this was from Daria Kotys-Schwartz, essentially like how to keep track, I guess, of sort of there's this issue of like the timesheet scenario, right? So part of student accountability could be that they are, you know, tracking their time on the projects, and they report that weekly in some transparent fashion. You know, how do we get them to, what we want them to do is to deliver value. We don't really care so much about how much time it took them to deliver that value, but we need some way of measuring it. I guess, you know, these can lead to students on, I found when I do this in team meetings, students reporting their time, that, you know, others that go, well, there's no way that Johnny spent that much time doing this, because I saw what Johnny delivered, and it was, I think I could have done that in half an hour. But sort of how, and this is a problem in the workplace as well. So how do we shift students to this idea of delivering value from just reporting their time? And I guess, Daria, I'll give you a swing at it, and then maybe Izetta, I'd like to get your opinion on this one as well, because of, you know, what we're dealing with from an HR perspective.
One thing I think, like you said, Keith, is, you know, does time really matter? Or are we focusing on the process? That was brought up earlier also. The reality is not every single one of my senior design teams is the exact same, given the time that's required. If I look at the scopes across the different projects, we start out in a fairly equal place, and there's a massive learning curve for each of them, and we explain that they will become the expert on that project. Their team will become the expert. But what we many times focus on is an equal distribution of work that meets the requirements of that client. And so instead of focusing on how much time does it take, we try to really put time in on the front end of scoping the project. We work with our company clients so that we say to them, what would you give a engineer for a 1-year project if they were an entry level first year on their job? Let's scope the project about there. And then we spend time upfront on our side in the summer, making sure that that project is scoped appropriately so it does take all team members. And what we're looking for typically for us is we're 2 semesters, 3 credit hours. We're looking for 12 to 15 hours a week of time on their capstone design projects. And what we're really, so we spend more time on that scoping side. So it's not an issue of, I spent this much time doing CAD this week, I spent this much time doing this. It gets back to Olga making their work very visible, making their tasks visible. And what we're really trying, and it's actually part of our learning objectives for the course, is being able to run those teams by 2nd semester on their own. The project manager can run that team and there's an equal distribution of work that's happening. Now, mind you, there's certain weeks that the test engineers are busier than the manufacturing engineers, and that happens, but are they cohesively working together, doing their roles, doing their tasks, both administrative and technically, to keep pushing that project forward? So we stop getting away from this idea of how many hours are you working, and are you getting your tasks done? Are you getting your tasks done to move the project forward? And we get back instead of focusing on the project management side of it, instead of the Daria did 5 hours this week. Instead, we also are very realistic, and we talk to them. Our expectation is them to do work every week, right? Not take those weeks off, but look at how we all manage our time also. I mean, one thing that I always say is reflect on how we manage our own time. In certain weeks, certain projects get more of our time than others. And does that happen to them? Yes. But do I hit my deadlines? Absolutely. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. I mean, I had a conversation with a student this past fall. She told me that if I sleep 4 hours a night, I have 2 hours to myself on Saturday that I can have on my own time. Otherwise, all of her project work and all that kind of stuff that she had scheduled herself to that point.
So Keith, that's actually, you just brought something up. As we talk about these team charters and our teams talking with each other, part of that conversation is also what's important for them, not just in this capstone experience, but in their lives as a whole. For me, my staff knows my family and being home at dinner every night is an important part of my life. I schedule my life to make that happen. And so for our teams, we encourage them also to have that conversation. This is a transitional experience. How will they start to do this the year that they leave us, to be able to prioritize both their home lives and their work lives and be able to work smart to be able to get this work done?
Well, that speaks a lot to the work-life balance, and I think that's another thing that we can look at as we demand a lot from our students. I mean, I too like to have that 10 to 15 hours a week, including class time. I'll say with their class and the project. But I found when I moved from the University of Florida, that was okay at UF. At UT, it's not. The students take bigger course loads, and this was like a big shocker. So, so I guess let me pivot just a little bit here. Okay, let me talk a little bit. You touched on this a little earlier, Daria, and I'd like to open this one up to Olga and Izetta. So there's a time when it's not the student team that is breaking down. It's actually the mentor that's not pulling their weight. And then on top of that, there's a difficult conversation that maybe we as the coordinator need to have with that mentor. And of course, we also have to make sure we're trying to balance their professional credibility with the students. We're not going to. We have to be careful not to out them in some way to their colleagues, but yet we still need to have that difficult conversation. I guess so. Olga, you're in this role now as a department chair. How do you navigate through that conversation? And then I'd like to hear from Izetta and Daria.
Yeah, that's a hard question. You know, I've mentioned a lot just that ability to make work visible, and I think that visibility and that transparency of the work is really important for faculty mentors to see as well. And so it's not only kind of within the team. So if one is able to see how other teams are performing, I think that helps kind of build accountability as well. And simply having regular check-ins, not only when bad things happen, but just build it into the culture that there will be regular check-ins, whether something is happening that's going well or whether something that's happening that is not going so well. And so I think it's important to just build in those just checking points, those reflections, those kind of retrospectives from an agile point of view. And so that goes both with the student teams, but that also goes with the coaches. It goes with sort of external liaisons that may be part of a team. And so if there's sort of, if it's built in up front that here's the check-ins that we will be doing and how are your teams performing. I think in a group setting, it allows, and when the work is made visible, it allows everyone to see how a team is progressing, how often advisors meet with their teams, you know, so you begin to see like gaps that exist. And if things really kind of progress, then yes, I think a one-on-one conversation, sometimes informally, just kind of walking, like, how's it going? I noticed this, I observed this in the submission of the team. What's happening with the team? How often are you all meeting? You know, are you finding others that are able to sort of support the team? Do we need to find others? So I don't know. I don't know if that's still a little bit indirect, but I kind of try to tackle it by building in those checkpoints.
Well, you know, and I found that, believe it or not, the faculty, when I talk to them in the springtime, they don't remember that 10-page guide to coaching projects that I provided them in the fall. Did you read that? Like, did you send that to me? Who knew? Listen, folks, I just realized, I looked up at the clock, and it is after 5 o'clock. I think we probably need to bring this to a close. First off, I really want to thank our expert panel. You guys were just absolutely awesome. And there was so much chat going on during this conversation. This was really fantastic. So audience, really my hat's off to you. We're considering hosting some news and brews, maybe weekly, just setting up a chat session or something on Zoom, maybe one day in the afternoon a week, just to share, or those could be organized around some topics. Please be keep a lookout for those sessions coming up, and we can use the Slack channel, I think, to help organize those deals. So again, thank you, everybody. I had a blast today, and it was just so awesome seeing everybody's picture and hearing from folks.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you, Daria.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
everyone.
appreciate it. Awesome job.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate.
That's cool.
Well done, Olga and Azana.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you all.
Good to see everybody.
Some for the first time. That's great.
Good to see you, Steve. Yeah, Libby and Alexis and Beth were working furiously in the background there. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's definitely a full contact sport to do these, so appreciate it. Bridget, awesome job.
Is that the view out your window, Keith?
Beg your pardon?
Is that the view out of your office window?
No, that's our new building, yet to be named, but
Yeah.
we'll have
Nice.
right now they call it the Engineering Services Facility, but
Mhm.
it'll host our nuclear engineering program and then our freshman design and leadership program, and the dean's office is moving there, and then I've got a 15,000 square foot innovation lab on the bottom floor that I'm really excited about too.
Sounds great. Use it in good health.
Well, we'll see if it's complete by next fall.
Yeah.
We want to move in.
Yeah, we've got a mechanical engineering renovation that it's been delayed and actually needed to be renovated when I was a student there in the